one of my patients who demanded that I hypnotize him, and I agreed that he should be hypnotized. He insisted on beating time with his foot. First his right foot, then his left foot, then his right hand, then his left hand, and every little while getting up and stretching himself and settling himself more comfortably. All I did in the matter of hypnotizing him was to note when he was about to shift from the right foot to the left foot, and when it was too late for him to change, give him the suggestion that he was shifting from right foot to the left foot. And then when he was shifting from the left foot to the right hand, I'd note just when he was about set to do that, and then suggest that he use his right hand now, and then his left hand, and now it's about time for you to get up and stretch. What difference did it make to me whether I was inducing hand levitation, moving laterally, medially, laterally, up, down, or whether he wanted to beat time with his hands and feet and get up and stretch? If he wanted that type of behavior, let him have it. But I really ought to be willing to use it. If he wants to laugh at my technique, my suggestions, encourage him to laugh and gently suggest, and now here's another suggestion you will probably find very, very funny. But then again, I may be mistaken, and you may not find it funny at all. I really can't tell. And so I've covered all possibilities. He may find it funny, he may not find it funny at all, but then I really don't know. He'll have to demonstrate to me whether it's funny or unfunny, and he doesn't know that he is obeying my suggestion, that he demonstrate that it's funny or unfunny. You merely observe all of their behavior, and you're perfectly willing to use it. I've had patients come in and spend their time merely cursing at me because I think that I am a such and such and such and such hypnotist. And I tell them, yes, that's right. I do think I'm such and such a hypnotist. And here are a couple of more words that you could really have added and made it a much more emphatic statement. And I can suggest even stronger words. And they can accept those, and the first thing they know, they are accepting other words. And it's very easy to meet them at their own level. Too often the tendency on the part of the operators to think that he must correct the immediate behavior of the patient. One doesn't really take that attitude. One takes the attitude that the patient is there to benefit eventually. And eventually, perhaps in a day, a week, a month, 6 months, but within some reasonable period, not in the immediate moment. Too often the tendency is made to correct the immediate behavior, and the patient really needs to show you that particular behavior. A patient who makes an urgent appointment with you over the phone, then comes into the office and sits there very silently, you can express your lack of understanding. And tell them that no matter how silent they are, that their unconscious mind is beginning to think, beginning to understand, that they themselves do not need to know consciously what's going on in their unconscious mind. What are you saying to them? You're saying that their unconscious mind can now work the awareness of the conscious mind. And you're making use of their silence, their conscious silence, and giving them to understand that they do not have to verbalize consciously at all, that their mere presence there within hearing distance allows their unconscious mind to work satisfactorily. I see no reason why one should resent a patient sitting quietly for a whole hour. I think it's a waste of time on your part if you don't use it for the patient. You don't need to say very much. All you need to do is tell the patient, let your unconscious mind work while your eyes roam around the office, while you note this book title, that book title, while you look at the carpet, while you ignore looking at me, while you attend to external noises. And what happens? The patient's unconscious mind begins to respond to your suggestions, and you discover that the hour of conscious silence is something that you put to use in the matter of inducing a hypnotic trance. And perhaps the next time they go into a hypnotic trance. Should I keep on right now or give you a rest?
Feedback.
From what? I think perhaps the better thing to do now is ask some one of you to raise a question. I see no hands going up, but your unconscious mind can think of some questions. Yes?
I'd like to ask you some purely mechanical things, like how long you like to use for a session, how much of a session you like to do in the hypnotic state. Do you use a short, long, medium period of time after the hypnotic state to discuss things on a conscious level, about how often you like to see patients in certain situations and so on?
I govern the length of time according to the patient's needs. That is my judgment according to what he can take. I've seen patients for as long as 16 consecutive hours. I had the patient hallucinate his meals, but during that time I went hungry. I've seen patients for 12 hours, consecutive hours. I've seen patients for 8 hours, frequently for 4 hours, and often for 2 or 3 hours, depending upon the patient's problem, the urgency of it. Usually I like to see a patient for only 1 hour. The first part of that may be for hypnosis, and the last half hour may be spent in discussing. Or I may tell the patient in the trance state that this matter will come up for discussion at some future date and that he is to feel comfortable about it until such future date. In other words, I use the hypnosis to govern the way in which things are presented to the patient. And the patients that can learn rapidly, the patients that can adjust rapidly, I will see 4 or 5 times a week, 6 times a week, sometimes 7 times a week. And others cannot take it any faster than once a week. And now and then you get patients who can't tolerate it any more frequently than once a month. Instead of having any set routine pattern for my patients, I have a completely random schedule for them. I shift them from once a month to 7 times a week for 2-hour sessions, and I shift the patient from a 4-hour session daily to once a week according to his capacity to digest psychotherapy. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir?
I understand that you've done a great deal of clinical work in universities and where you had a large number of patients to deal with. You're ready to do it.
There you have a half a dozen offices. You can actually have 12 patients going through therapy at the same time and working through, and you can circulate from one place to another. I can put half a dozen patients in the same room and make use of negative hallucinations so that he and I are alone. All 13 of us. And actually have them work through, and they do have negative hallucinations. And they don't hear each other. I have to keep on the alert. Now, especially when I was connected with the Wayne County General Hospital. I employed that method quite frequently. I worked it out first in the psychology laboratory, where with these odd bits of reasoning, these trick problems, where if you once know the answer to some little riddle or some little joke or some bit of reasoning, if you once know it, you always see through the problem. How many of you know the Norman Myers problem of supplying you with a monkey wrench, a garage, an apple, and a table fork as general accessory equipment? And there's a string hanging down from the wall over there, and a string hanging down from the wall over there. And you're told that if you use that glass properly, or that apple properly, or that table fork properly, you can tie those two strings together. You get a hold of this, walk over there, you can't reach it, and you go mad until suddenly you get the idea of making a pendulum out of them. You try out a group of subjects who are deaf and blind to everything except you as the operator. And then you tell these various little things just to one, because he hears you only when you talk to him. And if he does hear what you say to the other guy, he's not completely negatively hallucinating. And so you've got your test measure, and you can actually do a tremendous amount of therapy all at once, except you have to keep rather much on the alert. You can't be like a good psychoanalyst and sleep during the process. Yes?
John, how would you reach rapport with an individual who has either been hypnotized accidentally or has gone into hypnosis from an auto-hypnotic standpoint, and then in a state of amnesia and not knowing it, and you not necessarily knowing it to begin with, but when you find out the individual is in that hypnotic state, or if you've been hypnotized by someone else and left in the hypnotic state, and the hypnosis has not been removed, and he was then in a state of amnesia, how would you reach rapport with him to take him out of that state?
Very often the subject or patient will go into an auto-hypnotic trance just to get away from you, and really to get away from you, especially especially in the pre-catatonic schizophrenics. They are excellent in this matter of going into an auto-hypnotic trance and literally defying you to touch them in any way psychologically. And now and then you run across somebody who's been hypnotized and told that they must never, never, never again be hypnotized. And so when you try to hypnotize them, you just cannot succeed. Recently in Phoenix, at the seminar I'm conducting there for a group, two of the dentists have brought in an excellent subject and told me that she was a newcomer, that they wanted me to train her to be a good hypnotic subject. They had very carefully given her suggestions not to let me hypnotize her at all. And I sat down with her and tried to hypnotize her. But I noticed one thing immediately. She was very, very friendly, very cooperative, but she overstressed everything she said to me. I really don't believe that you can hypnotize me, doctor. I really don't. And as I listened to those statements, they weren't the simple statements of a person who really didn't believe it. It was a person who was expressing a conviction that I felt was foreign or alien to them. So I asked her what members of the group she knew, and of course she promptly mentioned that she knew Meyer and Bill, and those were the first two that were named. She also knew Thad and Tom and Dick. Oh yes, I know Harry too. But Meyer and Bill were the first two names mentioned. And I began wondering about the thing. So I asked her how she thought she would respond to hypnotic suggestions given by Bill or by Meyer. She quite honestly replied that she might be able to respond more favorably. And I asked her if there were any way in which my technique resembled Bill's or Meyer's. She said it really resembled theirs because theirs resembled mine since I had taught them. You see what's happening to her already? And then I suggested, now if Bill said your arms are getting heavy, would they get heavy? Quite possibly. And if Meyer said they're getting heavier and heavier, would they be getting just a little bit heavier? And of course, they began getting heavier. And all I did was to recognize that there must have been a previous hypnotic situation there. And I speculated as to who was guilty. And then tried to identify myself with them. And it was Meyer and Bill who had given her the suggestions. But on another occasion, the subject volunteered who stated, I've been hypnotized before, and it's been tried by many doctors since, but I've always failed to go into hypnosis. And I asked who was it that hypnotized you and how long ago. It was a stage hypnotist. And he told me never again to be hypnotized. And so while I've wanted hypnosis, I've always failed to go into a trance. I said, how long ago? At least 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Oh, where was it? was in a theater. What city? Chicago. Do you remember the name of the theater? How many people were up on the stage with you? See how many of them you can remember. What are the other circumstances that you can remember? Did you go there with friends? Did you leave with friends? Did you dine afterwards? Did you have a drink? But what happened when the stage hypnotist approached you? Did he tell you to close your eyes and get sleepy? Did he tell you to feel very sleepy? Did he have a voice like mine, or was he more commanding and domineering? And did he tell you, go to sleep now? Did he tell you to get your arms rigid? And what am I doing? I'm trying to evoke in her memory all of the forgotten things and to identify myself with a stage hypnotist at the time. Now, if any one of you runs across a patient who's been hypnotized by some one of your colleagues who has told that patient, don't let any other doctor hypnotize you, merely sympathetically and interestedly inquire into the details of that situation. And as they start recalling the details of that situation, they start developing their trance behavior of that situation. And as they develop the trance behavior of that situation, they go into a trance. And then you put in the suggestions, yes, you were told not to go into a trance then, just as I'm telling you now not to go into a trance again in the future. Just as I'm telling you now not to go into a trance again in the future. But before they can accept that suggestion of not going into a trance again in the future, they have to go into a trance right there in order to accept that suggestion. Their past training has been to accept that kind of a suggestion. You've got 5 years experience, perhaps, on their part, abiding by that sort of a suggestion. They'll gladly go into a trance to accept a reinforcement of that suggestion, but after you've got them in the trance right then and there, then you can qualify that instruction. Never again will you go into a trance for silly purposes. Never again in the future will you go into a trance for a useless, worthless, uninformative purpose. And you've accepted what they had, but you've gotten around the difficulty in your way. I think that's something that all of you ought to practice in cooperation with one another. Get a good, intelligent, normal subject. One of you put that subject into a deep trance and ask the subject not to let so-and-so put him in a trance. And then let so-and-so work out in his own mind the verbalization necessary to correct them. You use the same technique in the matter of psychotherapy. The patient tells you, for the last 10 years, I haven't been able to sit down at the table without first getting up and washing the silverware and the plate at least 7 times. And one of the first things I want to know about that is, how did you sit down at the table previous to 7 years ago? And if there's any way that I can get them to demonstrate, I do so. Because I want to know how they did it before they had the problem. And they never recognize that I'm putting them in a trance and regressing them to a period of 7 years ago, or more than 7 years ago. And so in this matter of difficulty in hypnotizing somebody, I've had subjects tell me, somehow or other, Dr. Erickson, I don't feel I can go into a trance for you. And so I try to put them in a trance and let them demonstrate that they can't go into a trance for me. I've met their need. And then I start reminiscing with them about the time they used to go into a trance with me. And they very promptly go into a trance in terms of the past. And then I point out to them in the trance state how I have tricked them, how I have manipulated them, and then I offer to give them a post-hypnotic suggestion never to go into a trance for me again, or I suggest that they might want to understand why they had that. And that way you can meet their resistance to you, and at the same time undermine their resistance and achieve a great deal in the way of psychotherapy. You see, the one thing in the use of hypnosis is this. You really ought to know more about it than your patients do. You ought to know it so thoroughly that no matter what develops in the situation, you can think of something, you can devise something that meets their needs. Any other questions?
In the case of this first case you described, Harvey, which time it was released completely of his handwriting problems. Was the original psychic trauma connected with the development of the handwriting problem?
I don't know if the original trauma in Harvey's life was that. All I knew was that Harvey needed to experience some feeling of achievement, of happy achievement, and that he would really go all out. I think I can illustrate that with a simple problem of how success breeds success. A doctor called me in to take care of his small daughter. She was failing miserable in reading, writing, arithmetic, spelling, everything. And the doctor was rather displeased because I sat down on the floor with the little girl and tried to play jacks with her. She couldn't play jacks, but then I couldn't either because I haven't got enough arm use, and I was just as awkward as she was. I spent every evening for 3 weeks sitting on the floor playing jacks. Now and then, at first, neither of us caught the ball, but pretty soon it became a little bit of competition about catching the ball and then picking up jacks. At the end of 3 weeks, she could play a much better game of jacks than I could. The parents were still disgusted with me. Then the next step was to jump rope. Well, literally, I can't jump, but I can tie a rope on the doorknob and swing it around, right or left-handedly, and she could swing it for me, and I made a mess out of jumping, and I could swing it for her, and she made a mess out of jumping. But in 2 weeks' time, she was jumping rope. And then the next thing was roller skating. Well, of course, on roller skates, I'm a total loss. I can't even wear one roller skate. It only took her a week to learn roller skating, and she did it very well. And then I challenged her, told her to meet me at my office the next Saturday afternoon, and I'd race her on my bicycle. I can ride a bike, really ride it. So she met me with her bike. She'd owned it for 6 months and hadn't tried to ride it at all. She was afraid to. But she certainly had a feeling of athletic accomplishment with me. I came out of the office and met her down there at the parking ground. I'm very awkward getting on a bike, as you could readily expect. She had a girl's bike. She could get on more gracefully than I could on mine. And I robbered off, There was just one thing the girl didn't know. She was an intelligent girl, and she was watching my behavior on that bike. I can ride a bike if I use only my left leg to depress the pedal. If I use my right leg, it slows me up frightfully because I can't control my right leg well enough. So I really stood up on those pedals and I used both legs, and the girl beat me home. That's all the therapy I did. The girl discovered that she could excel. And the girl knew that I had raced her brother on my bicycle, a Schwinn racer. And I'd beaten her brother, and she really felt good. She picked up in her spelling. She became the champion jack player in school, the champion rope jumper. She got A's in spelling, reading, writing, and arithmetic. I don't know what the original trauma was, but I do know what trauma I did to the parents. Because I made it awfully plain to them that they better teach the child the importance of self-accomplishment rather than making a great big storm out of a little bit of a school failure, that they needed to teach that girl something about self-accomplishments and self-achievements. You see, I think that in psychotherapy, too much emphasis is placed upon the long-dead past, and not enough attention is given to the fact that a patient must live today and should anticipate living tomorrow. I know that a traumatic thing of the past for me was the loss of a, what do you call the darn thing? These little pistols, cat pistol. That was really a loss. It's no longer a loss to me because I place a different value on things. And why should I go through all the misery that I had when I was a child and lost that cat pistol? I better think about my traumatic experiences in terms of today's language, today's understandings, today's emotional reactions. And I think too much stress is placed upon understanding childhood emotions without sufficient effort to translate those childhood emotions into present-day emotional understandings.
How long did it take the parents to recognize it?
Not until the girls' grades came up did they realize what I had done. Then they both came to me and asked me, why did you play jacks and why did that have that effect on the child? The child needed to learn that she could do things.
Was it only after your success appreciated by the parents that was your bill?
That's right. When the girls' grades came up in school and they wanted to know how that was possible when I hadn't done anything, I pointed out the girl was accomplishing. And then they could see it. And I think that was much better. The girl is now grown up and she's a mother. And she's happily married. She won honors in school and in college. Then the last time I saw her, I asked her how playing jacks was and how skipping the rope and roller skating. She said she was too busy with her children, but she certainly was going to teach them how to do those things. Yes, doctor? Did you want to speak to me, Mary? Are you asleep or awake, Mary? Whichever way you are, Mary, listen to me. I want you to continue sleeping if that is your wish. I want you to wake up if that is your wish. I want you to enjoy listening to me. I want you to enjoy hearing what I have to say. I want you to remember and give Glenn whatever advice and counsel he needs. And I want you to remember things that he's likely to forget. And don't let anybody annoy you. Give them a merry push aside whenever they try to intrude upon you. Yes, Doctor?
One other question, Doctor. I've been puzzled since sitting and listening to you today. I remember at one of our previous seminars, if you recall, that I made mention of the fact that it might be better to, when these lectures are given, to hypnotize the entire group and give the lectures to them. I'm wondering now whether I'm hypnotized now. My arms are feeling funny.
Well, that's right, Doctor. You always have gone into a trance whenever I've been lecturing. And keep your seat in your chair and hold it comfortably. And let your back and your shoulders be comfortable, but sufficiently rigid. But you have been listening to me in a trance state. You undoubtedly will remember all the better for it. And there's a number of others in the audience that have been doing some very nice hypnotic sleeping. Yes?
On average, how long does a post-hypnotic suggestion last for a patient?
It depends upon the post-hypnotic suggestion. In the 1930s, early 1930s, I was doing some experimental work with a PhD in psychology. And it came time for Harriet to leave for some other part of the United States. And I asked Harriet if we could investigate this matter of the persistence of post-hypnotic suggestion. She thought it was a good idea. And so I explained, I don't know when we'll meet again. It may be next year, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 or 20 or 25. But this is the post-hypnotic suggestion I'd like to give you. When we meet again, if the situation and the setting is suitable, after greeting me, fall into a deep hypnotic sleep. 15 years later, I was attending the American Psychological Association meeting. I was in company of Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist. And we went into a restaurant for lunch. And Gregory looked around for a booth that we could sit in so we could eat and converse. And he found only one. And he remarked, there's a girl in there. Shall I ask her if we can join her? And I said, sure, go ahead. She's probably a psychologist since it's a psychological meeting. So Gregory went into the booth, asked this girl if we could join her, and he came down to the counter and picked up my tray and his and took them up to that booth. As I entered the booth, I saw Harriet, whom I hadn't seen for 15 years. Harriet looked at me, looked at the man. I introduced her to Gregory Bateson. She recognized the name. The introduction was acknowledged by Harriet, and then Harriet went into a deep trance. The situation, the setting was suitable. The stranger with me was obviously a friend of mine. He was obviously a student. She knew his name, knew that he had published in the field of anthropology, and therefore should be scientifically interested in hypnosis. There were only the three of us in the booth, and therefore Harriet went into a deep trance, very much to Bateson's astonishment. So I asked Harriet how everything was going, what her work was, and then I had her awaken, and she thought I had just completed the introduction to Bateson. She didn't know she'd been in a trance. That's 15 years to my knowledge. I haven't seen Harriet for a long time, but if the setting and the situation is suitable, I'm very certain she'll go into a trance for me. I've done that with quite a number of some of my patients that I haven't seen for years. Upon meeting them again, will readily go into a trance, will readily carry out some post-hypnotic suggestion. Because usually with my patients, I give them some little thing to carry along in life, and their good feeling toward me and toward themselves. So that if we chance to meet accidentally, I'm thinking of one patient I have in Baltimore. I certainly would never think of seeing that patient without wearing a very bright purple tie at least. That patient first came to me because of morbid fear of the color of red. And I've given that patient a very comfortable feeling about color. And so whenever there's a chance that I'll meet that patient, I'll put on one of my brightest purple ties. Because it shows I have a good feeling toward color, and my patient has a good feeling toward color. But that's a post-hypnotic suggestion. I hope that stays with her for life.
This afternoon, you gave no direct verbalization for induction to the audience. Why is it that certain individuals in the audience show hypnotic phenomena at this time? Are these individuals subject to yours, or were they subject to yours at one time?
So far as I know, several that went into a trance are total strangers to me. I haven't seen them before. That is, to my knowledge. They may have been present last Sunday. I think that's when they're presented before.
So what is the explanation for the trance induction?
The trance induction is this, that I spoke about the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. And their unconscious mind was listening, and they were unconsciously interested in trying to understand. And haven't you seen the parent who is very eager that the baby chew that solid food and goes through a chewing motion, and every time the parent wants the baby to open its mouth, the parent opens the mouth. And when they listen to a lecture on hypnosis, you often find that people go into a trance just to listen better, to hear better, to understand better. Dr. Rogers here always goes into a trance, and he remembers much better that way, because he's really listening with utter intensity. And when you're listening to a radio program of music and you want to single out the instruments, you don't look at a bright light or something like that. You close your eyes, you turn your dominant ear toward the music, and you very carefully shut out visual stimuli. And if you're holding a cold glass in your hand, you put that down so you won't get the coldness. And usually in a lecture on hypnosis, people will close their conscious mind so that they can listen better with their unconscious mind. Does that answer your question?
When you're describing these post-hypnotic phenomena here, now, do these people who are in a trance, will they take this in any way personally?
They're aware that this is a lecture that is not personally directed to them, that all that's directed to them is the general understanding. Now, before the time is up, wait a minute. How long have I?
You've been in a
Anybody that wants to walk out of this, please do so. I might say something about indirect suggestion. And I'm going to give indirect suggestion to somebody in this audience right now, at whom I looked eye to eye just a little while ago, and who's aware of it. In that person's mind, the identification has been made. And what are the indirect suggestions? There are a lot of things that you want to accomplish. Your unconscious mind can work on them. And really work on them. Work on them at its convenience. And work very hard. And 3 months from now, 6 months, 9 months from now, a great deal can be accomplished. Your unconscious mind can really work on those matters. Really work on them. There are a number of them. And you can really work on them. And that applies to everybody in the audience. There are a lot of things that you can do. There are a lot of things that your unconscious minds are interested in. And you can really work on them. In the next few months, the next 6 months, the next 9 months, the next 12 months, a tremendous amount can be accomplished. And I hope all of you take a tremendous unconscious pleasure in letting your unconscious mind work for you. And I think I'll call it an afternoon, so rouse up everybody. Wider and wider always.